In a high-profile case involving the UK's criminal justice system, a police officer has been acquitted of the murder of 24-year-old Chris Kaba, who was fatally shot in South London in 2022. Martin Blake fired a single shot when Kaba, linked to a firearms incident, tried to drive through a police roadblock. The court ruled that Blake's actions were justified, sparking both relief among police supporters and renewed protests from groups calling for greater accountability and action against racial profiling in law enforcement. At the same time, the UK faces a growing crisis in its prison system, with overcrowding reaching critical levels. To manage this, on Tuesday, the government released 1,100 prisoners early, excluding those convicted of serious crimes such as violence and sexual offences. This move aims to ease pressure on the system, but has sparked public concern about safety and the effectiveness of the UK's justice system's ability to balance punishment and rehabilitation. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, it's been a while.
Hello.
Nice to be sitting with you. So much has been happening. I suppose next week we'll talk about big news, which is going to be Rachel Reeves's first budget, and of course the result of what's been a very long-running Conservative leadership campaign. But this week, it appears as if criminal justice is at the centre of conversations, particularly because on Wednesday there was an incident where a police officer was cleared for the shooting of a young black male, I think he was of Congolese descent, Chris Kaba. There was concerns that perhaps there could be similar scenes that what we saw when George Floyd was killed. It's really riled up the black community. I think he was unarmed at the time. But then, of course, there are early releases. A second batch of prisoners are going to be released early. Just talk to me about some of the headache that Sir Keir Starmer is having to contend with this week.
Yeah, so two different issues. Important to point that out, but you're right. Unarmed black person being killed by police, that does strike of Black Lives Matters protests and things getting out of control. And I think the use of the phrase unarmed here is a little bit misleading, because he was driving this car at police when they asked him to step out of the car. So he was unarmed in terms of he didn't have a weapon or a...
But he had a car.
But he had a car, and, that can be very dangerous. So it's just come out recently that he was a core member of one of London's most dangerous gangs, and he'd been involved in 2 shootings the week before. So while he didn't have a gun on him, and while it's a very tragic incident that occurred, that he was shot and he was killed, it's got to be taken in that context that he was in a gang, and he was the leader of this gang, and he was being tracked by police, and he was trying to get away, he was trying to escape, and he was ramming them with a car. So that's that there have been protests around that. There's about 150 people outside the court, but this is a jury found the police officer not guilty very quickly, and I think there's questions around why the police officer who was named in the UK press was taken to court at all, and the process around that. So that's one thing, and it looks like it's not going to be the kind of protest that we've seen in 2020, 2021 around Black Lives Matter, but we've seen with things like the Southport murders how things can get out of control when there is race involved and things like this. Exactly. So the other justice news that you mentioned was that the government is today releasing 1,100 prisoners early. This is because when the Labour Party came into power, they only had about 100 spaces in prisons at the time. 100 places in a population of about 80,000 prisoners is very, very small. So
before mass incarceration in the summer.
Well, exactly, yeah. So they've been talking about this for a while, and again, this is quite an easy one for the press to kind of hype up and sort of take a little bit out of context, because releasing prisoners early sounds like could be chaos on the streets. But just
quite frightening for victims, though.
Well, yes, but need to point out that this is offenders serving more than 5 years will be released on licence after spending 40% of their time behind bars, unless they are serious violent offenders, sex offenders, or terrorists. So, the most serious offenders are not going to be released onto the streets, and you're not going to get rapists and murderers walking around the streets. This is going to be more sort of white collar crimes. But it is the other thing that's happening is that there's a review, an emergency review that's taking place to see what we should do going forward, because you can't, I don't think, keep locking up more and more people exponentially so that the prison population, and we've heard so many times that prison doesn't work for many people go on to reoffend. So it's important to get the most serious people off the streets. But that's what's happening today, and there's going to be probably more prisoners released in the future again in this same kind of style. So I guess they will sort of track and review what happens with these prisoners, but around 1 in 10 unfortunately do end up going back to prison because they, they skip their license or they don't.
I think last time, I think somebody got sent back to prison on the same day.
Yeah.
Not great. I haven't spoken to you in a couple of weeks. Talk to me, how's Sir Keir Starmer doing? The last time we spoke, he was in lots of hot water over, his spending habits, or should I say his recipient habits. That seems to have gone away.
I think it has. I think the problem that Sir Keir has at the moment is that they're not. I think sometimes if you look back to sort of the previous Labour governments that have done well, so Tony Blair, he had his press secretary right there in the heart of it,
yes, of
giving the media what they want. The media spinning away, Alistair Campbell, giving the media what they want. The media in the UK is like no other, really.
No.
It's so hungry for stuff. If you don't give it things,
they create things.
Keep under wraps, they will go digging and they will find things.
Yeah.
And actually, in the large scheme of things, the Prime Minister meeting Taylor Swift is not. I mean, it's a
box
story.
At Arsenal.
It's a story, exactly. It's back page story.
Yeah.
It's way down the thing. But in the current climate, and they're trying to find anything. Obviously, the right wing media
anything they can legally say.
The government need to be putting out more things. They need to be talking. They need to be giving. They need to be saying what they're going to be doing. They need to be like playing the system a little bit, because otherwise it's going to come back to this. And I don't think he's really deserved a lot of the criticism he's got for going and meeting Taylor Swift at a concert.
If that's all there is.
And Taylor Swift's a hugely influential person. If you're given the chance to meet her, well, of course you would if you're a prime minister.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be this. You should be spinning that in a way. Well, look, Taylor Swift wants to come and meet the prime minister. You want to be ahead of the game, really. You want to be the one that's giving those briefings. So I think they need to look at their press operations a little bit more. But you're right. It has sort of calmed down all of that. And remember, he's paid back a bit of money, which at the time people were saying, well, doesn't that show that you're guilty in a way? You're almost admitting guilt. You can't imagine sort of Boris Johnson doing that. Or if he did that, he'd then release a book saying he didn't mean to apologise. Anyway, so I think it's calmed down a little bit for Sir Keir. But the budget, there's so much pressure on this budget to go well, isn't there? Because they've kicked this can down the road for quite a long time.
Yeah.
And that in itself has created quite a few headlines and quite a lot of spotlight on Rachel Reeves and the budget in a week's time.
Absolutely. I think there were borrowing figures out this week. Not great, highest borrowing on record in a couple of years. But yeah, we'll discuss how it all comes out in the wash next week. Thanks, Simon.